Okay, Tom. So this is Tom. You will talk about Andrena. Okay, thank you, everyone. Oh yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming, despite the wave of infections going around. So I would like to, obviously, been invited to come and talk about Andrena. My apologies for giving the presentation in English. I have spent all of my time learning French, and I could give the presentation in French, but not in Flemish, unfortunately. So I hope this year to publish a full revision of the Belgian Andrena fauna, just like, and with a complete identification key, like the keys of Alain Pauly for the Halictidae and other groups. And so this talk is going to be about some of the advances and clarifications that have been made with the general fauna, but most of it will focus on the Micrandrena, the small black Andrena, and then the rest of the day will focus on the identification with a new key that I have put together, and hopefully by the end of the day everything will be much clearer. So I'm also going to put in just a few slides of Belgian species, but from other parts of Europe. So this is the true Andrena pilipes, which may or may not be a Belgian species in the south of Spain, where it already has its second generation in May, when if you caught this species or a bee like this in Belgium on the 21st of May, it would probably be the cryptic species Nigrospina, which probably is a good species, but I still need more genetic evidence because it goes from Morocco all the way to China. So it may be a complex or it may just be variable. But that's not the focus of today's talk. So I wanted to give you some context about Andrena. This is a really good time to work on Andrena because we have several large molecular phylogenies that have just been published or will be published very soon. Now, obviously, it's quite small, but basically, if you take the family Andrenidae, the only genus that occurs in our region is Andrena, but it evolved in South America. If you look in yellow, you have the neotropic. So you have a small group of genera here, Euherbista or fauna, and Alocandrina. There are maybe 20 or 30 species in these groups. So that's the oldest lineage. And then you have a slightly younger lineage, which is found in North America. It's found in Arizona and California. That is the sister to the group of Andrena. That's marked in blue. And then we come down to this branch here. And the oldest in our region is this species called Andrina Cubice, which you find in Turkey, Greece, in southeastern Europe, into the Middle East. This is actually now a new genus. So we have elevated that. So the oldest Andrena are found in the Middle East. So it was historically thought, because you have this diversity in North and South America, that Andrena must have evolved in North America or South America. But when you look at the genetics, this group, the Cubiandrina, are found in Turkey. There are 3 species, and they are sister to all Andrena. So 1,600 species of Andrena and 3 species of Cubiandrina. So they are found in our region. So we are closer to the center of Andrena diversity than we thought. So this is the group of Middle Eastern species that are most basal. From a Belgian perspective, we can see here, hopefully, Andrena coitana and Andrena tarsata. So these are the oldest Andrena in Belgium, in our group. but it's obviously not the center of diversity. And I wrote a paper on Andrena. They have these several unusual adaptations. Unfortunately, the presentation is slightly unclear, but they have an extremely large and cuboidal head, and the propodium is entirely declavous. So we think of normally on the propodium of an Andrena, you have the dorsal part, and then it falls away. So you have the propodial triangle. In Andrena, it's completely declavous. There is no propodial triangle. So if you're in Turkey or Southeastern Europe, you might find some Andrena. So, as I said, there's about 1,600 species. I estimate that there are around 200 to 300 undescribed species in Andrena. Since the start of the pandemic, I have described, or by the end of this year, I will have described about 70 species of Andrena. It's the one good thing about the pandemic, which I have had time to write. But there are a lot of undescribed species, and there are many species to elevate. So this is the center of diversity, Turkey, Israel, Iran, and they dispersed into North America several times. So they are absent from South America. There are a few species in sub-Saharan Africa, maybe 20, many undescribed, one species in Malaysia, but you can see they generally avoid hot and tropical areas. And so the Mediterranean and Central Asia, that's the most interesting part. Okay. In terms of the fauna here, it's, to me, very unclear as to its actual size, because there have been several listings. Leclerc is probably the first complete for his atlas. But as you can see, it's quite variable between 77 and 89 species, especially since some species were listed just with a question mark by Patini and Terzo is not very helpful. So there are what I would call taxonomic hangovers because of conflict between the interpretations of different authorities, obviously identification errors and new species. So I immediately threw out 18 species. So we can conclusively say none of these are part of the Belgian fauna. I don't expect you to read all of those, but I will just point to a few because a lot of the information for some of these listings comes from the Pierre Rasmon's database. There are several just database errors where the wrong species has been encoded. For example, Andrina cinerea is a Mediterranean species. It's just someone has clearly mistyped cineraria as cinerea. Barbarae is a confused species, but this is alpine. You find it in the Alps, not in Belgium. Andrina chrysopus, impossible. It is a specialist of asparagus. There is not a lot of wild asparagus growing in Belgium. You find this in Southern Europe. And then something like Nasuta, Andrina nasuta, it is a specialist of Anchusa. There's not a lot of wild Anchusa in Belgium. So we can throw away many species. No, please interrupt.
Because I recently come across Andrena clavipensis. There are some historical observations of species in Belgium, and if you go and look at what was in Minutial, you have some observations in Turkey and some in Belgium. Yeah, so Andrena glabriventris is endemic to Turkey. It's been there's great confusion. Vanka reported it from Hungary, but that's extremely likely to be wrong. That group of species is the worst group of Andrena in the world. They are exceptionally variable and exceptionally speciose. I suspect that half of the European species are undescribed. So it's historical specimens from Mexico.
Yeah,
show up in GP.
They need to be re-inspected, but I actually have the type of Andrena glabroventris in my apartment at the moment on loan from the Senckenberg. It, in my opinion, is endemic to central Anatolia in Turkey. So there's serious problems with the use of these names. So I think we can ignore that one. But I would like to see those specimens, but I'm pretty sure we can ignore that one.
Is it helpful if I send you the records?
Yes, please, yeah. So I can expunge them, so I can delete them. So yeah, so basically, because this group is so full of species and there's so much confusion, you get examples like this when names have been applied incorrectly, and then because people don't know enough, because the information is obscure, then they get repeated and repeated through the databases. Yep.
I see Andrena Rufula.
Yep.
I think that was found in the Netherlands.
Yeah, so it is, yeah, it can be, it's very close to Andrena fulvata. I would suggest that it's possibly fulvata. I have comparative material of Rufula from Southern Europe. If they can barcode it, there are good barcodes of Rufula online. It's not impossible because things are moving north, but I would like to see that material.
2019 in the dunes of
In dunes.
yeah.
I mean, dunes are generally not the habitat for that subgenus in general. I will not pass judgment until I see the specimen, but I'm skeptical. Sure, yeah. In the places where I've seen it, I found it in Haute-Savoie in France, in apple orchards. So you find it in Switzerland, southern France. It goes over to Turkey. You find it in the Taurus Mountains, and it goes south to Lebanon and Israel. Again, associated with broadleaf woodland, rosaceae, and flowering shrubs. So ecologically, dunes are not the habitat of Rufula, but I remain available for Dutch identification should they send me any specimens. Okay, yeah, so I wanted to draw an example to Distinguenda and Nitidula as an example of this taxonomic hangover. So this is, as far as I can see, the first evidence or the first reason why Distinguenda and Nitidula have both been put on the Belgian list. So this is the card from Leclerc, 1972. For Andrena obsoleta. So the taxonomy of this group is a nightmare, and obsoleta is a name from Algeria that Vanke applied to Distinguenda and Nitidula. He considered obsolete. He considered it to be one taxon, from North Africa to Europe, with the name obsoleta, subspecies obsoleta in North Africa, Nitidula in Southern Europe, and obsoleta distinguenda in Central and Northern Europe. It actually turns out I've now seen the type of obsoleta. It's actually a different species. There are two species in Europe, one called Nitidula in the south, and one called obsoleta, distinguenda in the north. So this is why obsoleta has turned into distinguenda and Nitidula, because from this you cannot tell which of those two species it is. So this is a map from Berger and Hermann, 2003, separating in the triangles Nitidula, which as you can see is an Iberian species extending into eastern France and southern Germany. And in black you have Distinguenda, which goes further north into Western Germany, central Germany, and is more eastern, going down into Greece. No material inspected from Belgium. I managed to find a specimen determined by Leclerc as distinguenda in the Brussels collection from 1880, but it was actually Andrina nana. So I cannot trust any of the determinations of Leclerc for the difficult groups. Leclerc was really a specialist of apoid wasps. He was not an Andrina specialist. And for these rare species, he made serious identification errors. So when I get a card like this with a complex taxonomy, bin. It doesn't mean anything unless we can find those specimens. The specimen of Nana, which he determined as distinguenda, is from Bouch, south of Namur. So that's obviously not south of Namur. I have no idea what that specimen refers to or what collection it's in. No idea. Yeah. So basically, we just have to take this off the list. There's taxonomic confusion. The person who made the card doesn't know how to identify the species. No, bin. And in the revision, it could be in the Ardennes. It's possible. We should keep our eyes open. It's a specialist of Brassicaceae. April, Ardennes, April, May, Brassicas, maybe. But for now, it's not on the list. Okay, this wonderful question, Andrena apicata and Andrena batava. So I have found some clarity. There is clarity, there is an answer. So for context, Andrena apicata was described from England by Smith. And in England, we've always considered there is one species. Andrena batava was described by Perez, the Frenchman, from Holland. And there's been a great lack of clarity as to what this taxon is, whether it is different from apicata. So in December, I visited the collection in Paris, and I was able to find this specimen, which was identified as Andrena batava by Tunison. Does anyone know Tunison? He worked at Naturalis. He was actually a specialist of Parasitica until his eyes became too bad, and then he moved on to Andrina. I've now looked, because I visited Naturalis a few times, I've actually, you need good eyes for Andrina too. I have now seen a lot of his material. He was generally quite good, but he didn't publish anything, and then he died. So the problem is that this is unpublished. So you cannot have a lectotype if you do not publish it. So this is currently not valid. And the problem is that the one he designates as a lectotype is a female. Fortunately, if you look, and obviously this says Holland on the label, if you look in Perez's publications, he doesn't say where the specimen was collected in the publications. But if you have access to his personal notebooks, which are kept in Paris, he writes the collection locality in the notebook. And when you look in the notebook, it actually says Leiden. So I was able to find male specimens. He says males collected from Leiden. I was able to find males from Leiden. So I will be making the lectotype a male, thank God, because as we'll see, females cannot be separated. Males can. So if you collect an Andrena apicata batava with the short tooth, it is batava. If you collect it with the long tooth, it is apicata. There are two species. So Leiden, I will be publishing in the Andrena paper. I will publish this as a lectotype, and we will cement the name on the short tooth form with the short tooth. If you look at the females, I don't know how much you can see that I've tried to mark it. If you look at Batava, the characters get, so this is the character given by Schmidt-Egger and Scheichel for the female apicata above and female Batava below. They argue that apicata females have a tooth at the base of the mandible, and Batava females have just a little lump, nothing, no pronounced tooth. If you look at the females that were collected with the males from Leiden, they do conform to the character of Batava, very, very short tooth. The problem is, if you look at apicata from England, well, we only have one species because you never find the male with a short tooth. We can say conclusively in England, there's only one species. They don't look like that. They look like that. So I think there's possibly a third species, because if you have specimens from the Alps, from Switzerland, they look like that. So in my opinion, you can separate the males, short tooth Batava, long tooth apicata, but the females cannot be separated. So
you say that females of apicata in Belgium don't have the blood tooth?
no, females of apicata in England look like this.
Oh, okay.
And the other character they gave about the size of the shiny midline being more extensive in apicata and less extensive in Batava, that also, it doesn't work with British specimens. And because apicata was described from England, the name apicata must apply to the English population. So if the English population does not look like this character is wrong. So in the key, I will separate apicata and Batava males, but females cannot be separated. So that will just have to be an aggregate, but the distribution will be from the males. It will be the same for Pilipes nigrospina. I will give the characters for the male genitalia, but females cannot be separated. That is just a reality in Andrena. So I have some clarity for Batava. It does exist, but you have to be out early and get the males. Yeah. Yep.
How are those separated by DNA barcode?
I don't have DNA results yet. From speaking to Christophe Prat, they are extremely close, and they are possibly not separable using CO1. They might be separable using UCE, which are ultra-conserved elements, which are much more expensive, but much more powerful. It could be a situation like Scotica and Trimorana, which cannot be separated with CO1, because you have, for Scotica Trimorana, Trimorana is the bivoltine taxon, and Scotica is the univoltine taxon. So you have Trimorana, Scotica, Trimorana. You actually have a broad clade of Trimorana, and Scotica is nested within it using the CO1. When you use ultra-conserved elements, you do get two clades. So some very similar species can't be separated with CO1. For the tiny Andrena, just the group of Andrena Wilkella, of Aculea, etc., we have similar problems. Some species, like Andrena Intermedia, have clearly hybridized in the past. There's been some kind of hybridization events in Spain, and they actually form multiple lineages. So yeah, CO1 is great, but it will not solve every problem.
What about their ecology? Because they are so similar and the way they look. Is their ecology also similar or totally different?
I mean, because nobody knows how to identify them, we don't know, but I would assume that both are specialists of willow. So Praecox, Apicata, Nycthemera, Batava, they should all be willow specialists. Clarkella. I have no evidence, no reason to think of anything I think if there was a difference in ecology, we would have seen it. And also they fly so early, there's very little else they could feed on. Okay, so for what I was very surprised at is in the museums, there is a shockingly small quantity of material. I looked in Brussels, I looked in Jean Bleu, and you have these atlas cards that are full of dots, and you go to the collection and there are no specimens. So these are probably wrong, but based on what I have seen, these are the oldest specimens I have seen of these species. Nana is definitely extinct. It's the same in Britain. In Britain, it has not been seen for over 100 years. It's a Mediterranean species. It's extremely common in Southern Europe. I have hundreds from Spain. Just a species that 100 years ago was in Northern Europe and now it's gone. Nothing to worry about. Andrena similis, everything is a misidentification, except for this really old material. Almost every specimen I have seen called similis is actually the cryptic of Aculea. So I'm very happy to see similis material, but everything I've seen is wrong. Andrena niveata, we will talk about this a little bit later, but I think it's extinct. Brassicas, you've got to search brassicas. It's a specialist of Brassicaceae. Loss of agriculture, low intensity agriculture, it's gone. Gelrii, I've 2 males, and that's it. The females are extremely difficult to identify. Almost all Gelrii are just Wilkella. 1943. Chrysopygia, chalk grassland. Almost all Chrysopygia, yes. So similis, cryptic of Aculea. Almost all Chrysopygia are misidentified gravida. You cannot use the color of the terminal fringe, the hairs at the end of the female. Gravida has black hairs and Chrysopygia has 100% golden hairs. But if gravida can be reddish, so people catch a gravida with reddish hairs, they think it's Chrysopygia. No, if it has even 1 black hair, it's gravida. You also, yep. Yeah, they're gravida. Yeah, it's reddish, but the problem is that the easy character is the color of the hair, but the true character in the females is in the hind femur. There is a carina in Flavipes. There is no carinae in Gravida, and then there's a carina in Chrysopygia. And because I've now looked at material from Hungary, Russia, Turkey, it's a species of grassland. Now, Gravida is a species of woodland. It flies earlier, collects pollen from trees. When you look at Chrysopygia, doesn't come out until late May, and it flies mostly in June. And in Russia, you find it in grassland. So the only records I have seen are from Mont Saint-Pierre, from the east, because it's chalk grassland. So this is a species which was on the very edge of its range. Species is almost absent from France. Very edge of its range, on high quality chalk grassland, open habitats, it's gone. If you catch Chrysopygia in woodland, it's gravida. So this species is extinct. Thoracica. Thoracica, I could find no specimens in collections, despite there being several historical records. This one seems to be clearly extinct. It's extinct in the Netherlands. It should be on heathland. I could not find specimens, but it's gone extinct at some point. So I would cut the fauna down to 78 species. It's a bit more manageable. And then I would say there are 7 species that, oh yeah.
Question about Andrena Cubice, because it looks already similar to, I think so, because I've never seen it before. Andrena Forsythica, is there some character like that you would say in the field? This might be a, because you obviously cannot just collect all the stuff as a
Yeah. So the best character, so it's obviously much shinier. The turgor of dorsata are densely punctate and dull to weakly shining. Combinata is densely punctate but brilliantly shining. The other character is if you have in the hand, and you look at the hind tibia, dorsata has the triangular hind tibia, flattened with very short hairs. Combinata has a normal hind tibia, so it's parallel-sided with long hairs. So if you catch a dorsata, have a look on the hind tibia. If it's triangular with short hairs, dorsata propinqua. If it's normal with long hairs, then it's something interesting, because it could be confinis, which is the correct name for congruens in Belgium. There are 2 species, congruens, Central and Southern Europe, confinis, Central and Northern Europe, but that has long hairs. Combinata has long hairs, dorsata propinqua short hairs.
That's also reassuring for our validation.
Oh yeah, if someone has a photo and it has short hairs, triangular hind tibia and short hairs, dorsata or propinqua.
You know anything about the model price on
Pictoliana?
That was one record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Historic or contemporary?
Well, previous course, it was identified by, well, checked by me.
What?
Yeah, issues were typed. I went to the field and I looked for combinata. I collected all dorsatas back then. There was no combinata. Probably never was. So.
What I would say is I collected this summer or spring. I collected combinata is common in Spain, and again it's very common. Most of these species, they're really Central or Southern European species. They're on the edge of their range. You go to Spain and they're super common. So I collected a combinata with Nomada picoliana in Central Spain. Nomada picoliana in the female sex can be confused with Panzeri or Panzeri sensulatu. I made that mistake several times. So I have barcoded picoliana if you want to compare it, because it could be Panzeri. But that group is very difficult. Also you get Renana, Nomada Renana, they're really difficult. So based on, I'm pretty sure that is a tight relationship, combinata picoliana. So I would say on the basis that we don't have combinata, it's probably not Nomada picoliana, but it's difficult.
Yeah, makes sense.
Marginata, I haven't seen any recent material. So there's 7 unconfirmed species, which are Alcanella, Anthrisci, Floricola, Intermedia, Limata, Nanula, and Similima. So we will talk about the Mick Crandrina in the Mick Crandrina section, but I just quickly wanted to talk about Intermedia, Limata, and Similima. So this is the Warnke map of Andrena Intermedia. The problem, Warnke was a genius, but he did make mistakes. He did have broad concepts, and he wasn't always right, even though he was very, very, very good. So these maps for difficult groups need to be treated very carefully, because Warnke often filled these maps with, when you actually look at his collection, maybe the males are correct, but the females are often, there's often other things mixed into the females. So for a taxon like Andrena Intermedia, the males can be identified every time with the genitalia, but the females cannot. There are some females that cannot be identified. So as you see, there are some dots for Belgium, but it requires careful investigation. Yeah, so this is the Aculea group. Basically, there are 6 species, and there's only 3 that remain in Belgium. Morphology, Aculea, and cryptic Aculea. The problem is because people don't know until now about the cryptic Aculea, people find the cryptic Aculea and they call it Genitalia, Intermedia, and Similis. No, it's just the cryptic Aculea. So this is Andrena Intermedia, one of the difficult Spanish species, which doesn't barcode as intermedia, but the genitalia are intermedia. Anyway, this is the closest I've come to finding it in the wild. You find it in this beautiful kind of, this is the Sierra Nevada, this is 2,000 meters, it's full of Fabaceae and Brassicacea and Lamiaceae. You need high quality grassland for intermedia. And those high quality grasslands are mostly gone from places like Belgium. So this is a listing by Leclerc. And I looked in the Jean Bleu collection, no intermedia, nothing in Brussels. Females are difficult. So I managed to find at Jean Bleu the record cards. So Chaudefontaine, 1924, Andrena Intermedia, female. Eben, 1937, Jean Bleu, but nothing in Jean Bleu, 1 female. That Similis Maréchal. Maréchal was generally quite good. His Similis are the oldest Similis I've seen from Belgium. Fidet Similis, could be Similis. Nothing in the collection, 1 female. Comblé au Point, 1 female, 1931, collection of Maréchal. Det Galriae, could be Galriae, but it's a female, so you can't be sure. Louvenier, 1965, Jean Bleu, nothing in the collection, 1 female. And that's it. So four females, can't find them in the collection, no males. Maybe it was in the East historically, but without male specimens, I cannot be sure. So it will go in the key, but I can't be sure it was ever part of the fauna. But basically no males, you can't be certain. Andrena limata, this is very close to Andrena nitida and Andrena thoracica. It may not even be a species. I need to work on that because if you go into Southern Europe, it intermixes. Anyway, I've seen specimens from Eastern France from the 1920s and 30s. Maybe it was here, impossible to say without a specimen. It will go in the key, but it's uncertain. It's certainly not here anymore. Then Andrena similima. There are no historical records from Belgium. I have no idea why Pierre Rasmont put it on the Belgian list because there are no specimens from Belgium. There is 1 specimen in the, not the Crévecoeur collection. It was collected from the French Ardennes over 100 years ago. And there's 1 specimen from Venlo in the Netherlands from 1877. I have no material. It cannot be considered a Belgian species. And also it's very strongly regressed in Germany and in France. So even if it was here historically, it's clearly extinct now. It's also part of a complex of species. The reason I call it Similima brumensis is because a true Similima was described from England. And so we actually have stable populations in the west of England, in Cornwall. And so it's probably found only in England and Western France. The continental form is mostly this form called brumensis, which has a very dark face. It's like Nigriceps, but a little bit different. The species in Switzerland has already been put back to being a species, Fregesneri, so you have an alpine species. And then in Greece, Bulgaria, Turkey, Iran, Caucasus, you have a subspecies, which is also a good species. And then I described another one from Morocco. So actually there's 5. There's 5 species that have been lumped together. You need to pull them apart. So keep finding things like nigrocaps. Maybe Bromensis will come back, but you need summer, you need high quality grassland, you need Centaurea. You basically need nigrocaps habitat, but it's not a Belgian species. Okay, so let's talk about Micrandrena. So Micrandrena are not as bad as you may think. If you use all of the tools available to you, and also if you remember you learn their ecology. This is a species called Andrina saxonica, and it is a specialist of ornithogallum. So they do have distinct ecologies. They do not all do the same thing. There are more clues that can help you. Okay. So the situation in Belgium is simpler because we can basically say there are 8 species that you will find. Okay, there's other stuff, we'll get to that, but at the moment there are 8 species because Andrena nana and Andrena niviata are extinct. So we'll go through these other species, and by the end of today, you will be comfortable with 8 species. Okay, then we have these doubtful, and we'll come to those. We've already discussed Distinguenda and Mitidula. They're gone. So, Andrena Alfcanella was not listed by Leclerc. This is the map by Pauly. It's completely obscure as to where these records come from. There are no specimens in collection. Everything I've seen called Alfcanella is wrong. I consider this species unconfirmed. In England, when I did my PhD, you find it on chalk. So species like Minutialoides, which you need on chalk in the summer, and Apiaceae and Dorcas. It could possibly be in the, what do you call the Viroin, this area? Viroin. Could possibly be down there, but I don't think so. Keep looking, but I don't think it's Belgian. I have material and it's in the key, but I don't think it's Belgian. And Anthrisci, this was listed by Leclerc at a time when the concept of Anthrisci was not clear. Warnke synonymized it with Andrena minutialoides. It's hard to identify. Schwenninger, Jack Schwenninger, revised the species and reinstated it as a good species. The closest material was Cologne in Western Germany. So it could be in the Ardennes, but I have not seen any specimens. Again, it's in the key, we will go through it, but I do not consider it to be present in Belgium. Very happy to be proved wrong, but I consider these, oh, and there were no specimens in the collections. Yeah, so it has a similar ecology to Semilabis. So it's univoltine, 1 generation. It flies mostly in June. Semilabis is maybe a little bit later, maybe more in July. It collects mostly from Apiaceae and Brassicaceae, and Semilabis collects mostly from Apiaceae. So they have very, very similar ecology. You have to search Apiaceae in June, July. I've collected it in Spain, in high elevation grassland. There it was collecting from Brassicaceae. But it's not, it can be found in woodland, but it's not a woodland species. It's a woodland edge species using Apiaceae. Generally in humid areas, you probably will not find it in Belgium in very dry areas. So I could see it in the Ardennes on the edge of wet woodland with Apiaceae in the summer. Andrena floricola, I could not find any specimens. Leclerc says he confirmed this identification. I don't know where, because he never said where any of this material was held. Floricola was described from England, and again, it has been extinct for more than 100 years. This is a species that's really found in Central and Eastern Europe, down into Turkey. If it was here, it's been extinct for a long time, and it's a typical pattern. It's gone from England, it's gone from Belgium. It's in the key, and I have some specimens, but we won't find it. Nanula, don't know why it's on the Belgian list. No specimens. There is one specimen from Dutch Limburg, identified by Tunison, which I have not seen that specimen, so it could be wrong. This is really a species, again, of more continental climates. Scandinavia collects all of its pollen from Apiaceae, wet grasslands, June, Scandinavia. It's not a Belgian species. Don't need to worry about it. So I consider this an unjustified listing. Okay, so we can throw away those species. So I will go through some of the characters that we will look for and are in the key, and I have made photographic plates for you to refer to interpret the key. What I will say is every single Micrandrena has a unique character. You just need to learn those unique characters and how they vary. So Andrina Forsythica, it has a genital capsule where the penis valve is very broad. Sorry, it's a little bit dark, but basically there are two species in Belgium, Stromella and Forsythica. In the males, they have a very broad penis valve. So if you remove the genitalia, you're down to two species. Very easy. And then you use antennal ratios. The females have a unique character, which is tertium 1. The marginal area is thickened and elevated. I don't know how easy this is to see here, not very, but basically this area, can we turn the brightness up, or is there like a remote? Oh, okay, close the curtain. But basically, most of the time, so one very important character that you will learn as you go through the key is detecting if something is punctate or impunctate, because this is very important to learn for Micrandrena. So hopefully you can see that on tertium 2 here, can you see these punctures here? I mean, probably not because it's difficult, but when you have the photograph close to you, you'll be able to, and you have a look at the specimens, you'll be able to see that you have punctate turgor, and then the marginal area is thickened and elevated. And again, it's much easier with the specimen. And thanks to Kurt, we have some good Andrena Forsythica specimens which you can look at. I borrowed your photograph for the purposes of this talk.
Okay.
And again, when we think about the ecology, from all of the pollen loads that I have analyzed, it's a specialist of potentilla. So it's a univoltine species. It does not fly very early with Minutial. It flies a bit later, mostly in May and June. You find it in grasslands where there is good potentilla, collects all of its pollen, maybe some other rosaceae, but small herbaceous rosaceae, chalk grassland, but also heathland. So on, is it potentilla reptans, the one that you find on, or repans, the one that you find on acid, not chalk. But just search potentilla and you will find Forsythica. I took the card of Leclerc and I just put a couple more dots where we've had recently confirmed records. So it's probably going to be more common in the Ardennes, but it will be around on heathland. So I actually consider, even though I could not find a single Forsythica in Leclerc's collection in Jean Bleu, I think this is probably fairly accurate. So it's around. So ecology, unique morphological features. Minutial. First thing to do is just learn Minutial. You can always do Minutial. That's good because it's 50% of the specimens. And again, it's easier when we have the key, but you're going to be looking at the scutum, the density of the punctures, essentially impunctate turgor. Again, it's very important to say, is this impunctate or punctate? And whether the turgor margins are flat or depressed. So this is Andrena Minutial. And can I no, change the brightness. I don't know if changing the brightness on here will. No, anyway. But basically, these turgor margins, technically they are a little bit depressed because you can see the difference between the disc and the margin. If they were not depressed at all, you could not tell the difference. But this is, as defined for our purposes, this is not depressed. And you will see later some photographs showing a depressed. So whether the disc is punctate or impunctate, whether the margins are flat or depressed, is a key character for Minutial. So yes, there are the marginal areas. They're not depressed, important to learn. And also the presence or absence of hair bands or hair fringes and how dense they are, whether they are dense or sparse. The male is basically the same characters. Density of punctures on the scutum, whether the turgor are punctate, whether the margin is depressed or flat. You should also learn I didn't have time to extract the genitalia fully, but some are better than others. But basically you want to learn the shape of Minutial genitalia. You should always be extracting Micrandrena genitalia, always. But basically they're rounded. If you see the sides, they're basically just round in a simple way. This is your default. This is the boring. This is the vanilla genitalia. Minutialoides is distinctive, and there are many characters that I use that I will not teach you because it's always the difference between the good characters to learn, and then when you've learned those, you can then look for other characters. But for the female, it's the irregular Scootal Punctures. The scutellum is shiny. Turgor hair bands, we'll come to why those are important, and narrow fovea. So the punctures here are moderately dense. You can't really see anything there, but anyway, they're less regular than Minutial. Again, comparative material. And the scutellum is shiny. This is a very good character for separating from Minutial, particularly in the summer generation. So level of complexity is there is morphological variation between spring generation and summer generation. We will come to that in the practical part. And again, you look at the turgor. They have hair bands. In the first generation, they are weak. And in the second generation, they are absent or close to absent. So in the first generation, Minutialoides can be confused with Minutial. So you have to be very careful with the presence or absence or strength of hair bands. Yeah, so they also abrade. So you should not, you need to look at the freshness, absolutely. If you have an abraded specimen, don't use hair bands. So this is why good ecological data is so important, because you need to know what time of the year So you can make assessments as, is this fresh or old? Is it early in its flight period? Is it late in its flight period? Is it the first generation or is it the second generation? So this is where the complexity does increase. And there are some obscure lateral punctures, and you can see that the tergial margins are slightly depressed, but this still counts as flat. And again, you will see really depressed. I will need to show you really depressed later. The male is difficult without genitalia. It still has the shiny scutellum, but you really need to look at the genital capsule. And if you remember from Minutial, it was evenly rounded, but with Minutialoides, the capsule is narrower. And hopefully you can see there's a little kink. It's not evenly rounded, there's a little kink. So again, it's much easier under the microscope. Andrena nana, I have some from Spain. It's very easy. You will never confuse it with another species, but you will also never see it in Belgium. So it's long extinct. So we're not even going to talk about it. Andrena niveata may come back, may be here. So we need to discuss it. It does have distinctive morphology, which again, I have bought some specimens. They have depressed tergial margins. The propodial triangle is weak laterally, and there are very strong hair bands. Generally, it can be recognized because of its very long and thick hair bands. What's important to remember is its ecology. I should really go, no. Yes, so it's a specialist of brassicas. So if you are not catching in areas that are rich with brassicas, you are not going to find Andrena niveata. In England, it is still present. You can find it occasionally in allotments, in community gardens, which have lots of brassicas. You can find it in on chalk, on low intensity agriculture. And as we'll see in a moment, you can find it on housing estates, which have lots of weeds. This is the card of Andrena niveata. I could not find any of these specimens. I found one from a different part of Belgium, but I could not find any of those specimens. It is possible, it could be in the Belgian Lorraine. When you go to Spain, this is the kind of habitat you find it in. You find it in very hot, dry places with brassicas. You get the very long, thick hair bands. So what you basically need to do is find a pseudo-Mediterranean habitat. So this is Sandwich in Kent, in the coast of England. This is a housing estate. And as you can see, there is this wonderful pseudo-Mediterranean habitat, which includes Andrena niveata. So look for pseudo-Mediterranean habitats if you want brassica specialists.
There's a lot of brassicas next to the Maas Valley. Well, the Maas is the only wild, between brackets, river we still have.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, you also have the turnover and flooding, summer floodings with floods, and which results in a lot of brassicas.
Yeah.
For instance, which is also a specialist in brassicas.
I mean, you could well find those two species together. If it's good for Lycopus, it should be good for niveata.
So it actually creates gravel banks, and then you get this sort of vegetation in the more natural setting. This is sort of the human-made or version.
The might go and go beyond and who are collecting, have been collecting in Limburg, lots near the Maas River. They might have niveata already.
Yeah. So I have the Andrena collection of Gobbe Janssen. Now that I've given this and I've finished a few other jobs, I'm going to be working on it in February. So I will let people know. I find Andrena niveata. I had to look through his avacula group, and it's just the 3 species. Could not find any similis or gelrii. But hopefully in the Micrandrena, there will be interesting things. But as someone who goes to the Mediterranean, I always look for pseudo-Mediterranean habitats in Northern Europe. They're completely artificial, but again, I think a lot of these historic species are also completely artificial. They're present in anthropogenic habitats. Now the anthropogenic habitats are gone. The bees are gone. They've just gone back to Southern Europe. They were doing a reverse vacation. Andrina pusilla. So this species is actually very common. It's probably the 3rd or probably the 4th most common Micrandrena, but it's just been mixed with Minutial and Suboparca. It's listed twice in the Red List of Belgian bees as a historical taxonomic hangover, because Warnke considered it to be a subspecies of Andrena sprita. So in the database of Mons, you have sprita. So you take an extract, you get pusilla and sprita. But no, one taxon, Andrena pusilla. It's distinct from sprita. We'll deal with that in a different publication. So you want to check the Scootal Punctures, the Clipeal punctures, and the tergial margins. So this is probably not very clear, but generally this is like Suboparca. You have very fine and very spaced punctures. So yes, sparse Scootal punctures like Andrena Suboparca. And this is the most, once you see this character, you will never confuse it, ever. I hope. Hopefully you can see that the tergial margins are depressed. Now, with the photographs, maybe it's difficult. You think Minutial, it's a little depressed, but these are, when you view it from an angle, when you view it from the side, you will see that these margins are strongly depressed. This is the key character for Andrena pusilla. Broken banded. Broad banded.
Which I think refers to the marginal area.
Okay. Yeah.
Broadband, is it not more related that the margin is larger than the disc in this case? As you see, Tergite 3.
Yeah.
Almost large. It's almost larger.
Could be. Could be.
In Minutial, it's
I
less.
think it's always difficult to judge because it's
Yeah. So this
depends a little
particular
bit on-
this particular specimen is slightly compressed. So I'm not going to commit to saying yes or no. It's not a character I use. For some males, the length of the marginal area is very important. In females, I generally don't think about it. We can have a look at the specimens, but I would need to think about that.
The hairbats, they seem a bit more expensive.
Yes, yeah. In a fresh specimen, they're a bit longer than in Minutial. Minutial has the very tight fringes. They're a bit more generous. In this is a nice fresh. I think this was collected by Carvel, but I'm not sure. It's in the box somewhere. The male, also the Scootal Punctures. It's also the tergial margins. The male is like Andrena Minutial. Males, in the spring, it has black hairs on the face, and in the summer generation, it has white hairs. So it should not be confused with Suboparca in the spring. Suboparca, the males have white hairs. Generally, male pusilla in the spring are confused with Minutial. But when you compare the two, you will see that Minutial have very densely punctate scutum, and in pusilla, the scutum is almost impunctate. So it has the scutum of Suboparca, but the facial hairs of Minutial. This is why people ended up putting them into both species, because it didn't quite fit Minutial, it didn't quite fit suboparca. Then here are the tergia. Now, hopefully you can see that these tergial margins really are depressed. This is the best way to recognize suboparca, Pusilla males, is that they have these obviously depressed tergial margins. And in this specimen, it's actually been slightly elongated. You can actually see that this should be under the previous margins. It's just been pulled out. And actually, this is a good example. So this feature is called the gradulus. It is the carina that exists at the base of a tergium, and it sits under the previous tergium. So you have a little carina that is normally invisible, but if you pull the tergia apart, the carina is visible. Can you see that?
Yes.
That line? That is another character that's important in females for Anthrisci and Semilavis. It's very hard to photograph and describe, but together you will see what the gradulus is.
Does that mean that you suggest that we have to
Oh,
gate all of them?
no. This was just chance. In the females, you can see the gradulus laterally. Yeah, so this part is always hidden because it sits under, but when you look at the very sides, it comes out. So you do not need to pull your specimens. Don't worry. This was just a chance. And yeah, tergial margins clearly depressed. When I say clearly, it's clear to me. Maybe it's not clear to everyone.
What about the ethology?
Kind of like Minutial, just bivoltine. People have sent the material I've examined seems to just be general habitats in Flanders. Brassicas. Yeah, most of the specimens have come from little brassicas in the spring. I think it's I need to do pollen analysis, but based on what I've seen, I think Minutial is more in the trees and Pusilla is more down on the ground. But because it's hard to identify, well, it's not actually hard, but it's been confused. There's not really any studies on its ecology. Certainly its sister species, Andrina spreta, which you find in Iberia, very, very, very strongly on brassicas. So I'm not surprised that in the north, Pusilla is also on brassicas. Not a specialist, but it likes brassicas a lot.
Actually, I think that if we manage to collect enough specimens, these are nice projects that tackle as
Mm-hmm.
If we have enough observations with point locations, the links with habitats to get enough these plants in species, certain types of interesting things. Right now, look at it, we have enough observations.
Work with the applicant to do some pollen analysis on all the microgreens?
So I am doing that because I need it for I'm supposed to be doing a project for the FNRS. So I am doing pollen analysis. So yeah, I'm fully behind that.
I would like to.
I mean, if you just catch material for me, I will do any Andrena, any pollen analysis. So go and catch things for me.
Yes.
Andrina semilavis. So I did not even try and photograph it. We will discuss it in person with specimens, but basically the female does not have a gradulus. But the first thing you look for, they have depressed and shiny tergial margins. And all my I had lent some specimens, so I only have ugly females, so I did not photograph them. They're very dirty. The males have a unique character. that is not found in any other male in this region, which is that antennal segment 4 is as long as wide. In all other Micrandrena in this region, it's clearly shorter than wide. So if you have a specimen, you look at antennal segment 4. If it's a square, semilavis. If it's not a square, it's something else. Stromella, another species that's been confused. Ecology. So it's univoltine. It's the earliest, along with Minutial. You find it mostly in March and April, maybe a little bit into May. It's mostly on trees, Salix, Crataegus, etc. And it has very obvious characters. Tergite 1, and the Clypeus, which is flattened and has an impunctate midline. But hopefully you can see there's a little corner. There's a little corner on the first tertium. And you can also use the difference in punctures between the tergite 2, between the center, which is impunctate, and the edge, which has large punctures. But generally, the Clypeus, tergite 1 and tergite 2 can always do stromella. The male, like Angina Forsythica, has distinctive genitalia. So it has this enlarged penis valve, and the Clypeus is flattened, again with a strong impunctate midline. So here we go. As you can see, the penis valve is very wide. And so if you look at the genitalia, and it's like this, it's stromella or Forsythica. And then again, with the ecological differences, if it's in March, it's stromella. If it's in May, it's Forsythica. So always remember the ecology. And finally, suboparca. So Minutial, number 1, suboparca, number 2, most common. You can almost always identify this species by the scutum, by the density of the punctures on the scutum. If you can learn that character, you can always identify suboparca. Generally, it is the most misidentified species, or rather, the name is applied incorrectly the most, because Pusilla and stromella get identified as suboparca. And I won't show any pictures of that because we will do it in the key. So I guess in summary, I'd say that the fauna is not as huge and full of mysterious species. There's lots of problems and lots of mistakes, and those will be cleaned this year. Micrandrena, we really only have 8 to deal with here. We have to be on the watch for new members, but generally just 8. And I think with this key, you will be 95% accurate. And I will publish the full key later this year. So thank you, and we'll do questions, I guess, and then we can do microscope work. Should I stop the recording, or you want to keep going? Okay.
But maybe, or we talk out loud, or you say the question out loud again.
Oh, okay.
The recording will be fine.
Yeah. I'll repeat the question.
So I really like to catch bees and photograph them in the field. Not always to need to take them home. My question is whether it is doable in some Micrandrena, because the general thought is now no. But with this presentation, I think maybe with some very good material cameras, it might be possible. What's your opinion on that?
So the question is, is it possible to photograph and identify specimens of Micrandrena from photographs? I think with a good understanding of the ecology and good photographs, probably yes for Stromella.
I can agree. I already did that. I did it in the field,
Mhm.
and I took it home, collected, and so it's visible. It's hard to see. And you need to have like a small angle, not straight up, but like a small tilted angle, and then you can see the small ridge.
Yep. So I think Stromella, yes. Forsythica, probably. But you also have big ecological clues for because if you are collecting from Potentilla, the two common or the two species that mostly use Potentilla are Subaparca and Forsythica. So if you're collecting from Potentilla, you really need to be able to say, is it Potentilla? Is it Forsythica, Subaparca, and probably Minutial, because you always need to check for Minutial. If you have a good photograph of the scutum, you can rule out Minutial. If you have a good photograph of Turgite 1, with the kind of cameras you guys are using, probably do Forsythica. You probably won't be able to positively say Subaparca. I don't think you can. So what I'd say, there are things you can rule out. So yes, Stromella, Forsythica, Niveata. If it exists, you can do Niveata from photographs. Absolutely. What's the list? Minutialoides, no, too tricky. Oh, I didn't even talk about Proxima because you all know Proxima. I just put it on because it's technically a Micrandrena. Semilavis, yes, you can do that from photographs, assuming that Anthrisci is not present. So you cannot separate Anthrisci and Semilavis from photographs. But until Anthrisci is proven to be in Belgium, we can, I think, generally say if it looks like Semilavis, it is Semilavis. I think that's a reasonable working assumption. If you have a good photograph of the turgor, you can see the margins are depressed and shiny. I think possibly Pusilla can be done if you get a really nice photograph of the turgor. So yeah, I'd say maybe 4 to 5 species can be done, but you need really good photograph of the turgor and probably the scutum as well.
And it's going to be easier.
Females are always easier, yeah. The males, I'd say for males, just don't bother, just take them back. You will see when we use the key, the male key is much more complicated because the males show generational difference and they show variation within the species. But females, yeah, you could probably do 4 or 5 of the females in the field.
So Subaparca, I missed it.
Okay, so Subaparca, you probably cannot do. You can say if it's not Subaparca, but you probably can't positively do it. It's tricky. But Stromella, Semilavis, maybe Pusilla, Niveata, Forsythica. I'd say 5. You could probably do 5.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe it's safer to just keep on collecting some if you see Micrandrena throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, until you become very comfortable with them, always collect.
Also for this distribution or distribution maps, they are highly improved since you've been around.
Oh yes, I think we'll be taking Pusilla and Stromella off the very rare category.
Yeah, because this year my first Micrandrena from the year was Stromella, and when I was home, I immediately saw, oh yeah, now I know what to look for.
Yeah, and again, it's once you get it's like when I start in the new country, when I have boxes from Turkey or Bulgaria or something. Once you start to understand which ones are common, then it gets a lot easier. So if you know Stromella, it's common, March, flowering trees, okay.
So I think it would be good to still keep on collecting at least a few. I mean, we're not
Well,
of course,
you need to build up experience. I mean, you take pictures in the field, I think, and you think it's going to be this one.
Yeah, certainly.
Now,
So you can positively confirm that your photographs were correct.
and now the thing is that when I catch Micrandrena, it's like what I just 90% Minutial.
I wouldn't say it's quite that bad, but 50 to 60%.
I really would like to rule that one out.
If you
say, if I have this Micrandrena, is it Minutial? No, I take it.
in that case, if you can get a really nice photograph of the scutum, including the scutellum in the female, and it's really densely punctured and dull, you can be 95% confident it's Minutial. You could do that with a hand lens.
It's possible with the Olympus camera. So
yeah. Well, you have the advantage there's no pin, because it's always a problem with the pin specimens that it covers the best character. But with a nice fresh specimen in the hand, scutum, you can be fairly confident it's Minutial. Dull, densely punctured.
okay, I'm hopeful.
Well, it's common, so you get plenty of practice.
Yeah, that's true.
I put more hope in the idea of the ecologies.
We worked on some documents on the ecology of the, well, you gave me, I translated it.
Oh yes, I remember that.
You remember? So don't do that again. You already did it. Maybe we can talk about just like improving it a little bit more.
Mhm.
I think we can use that document together with the key to like hunt for more specific species, and also I think for now the distribution maps of Lucida and Spinella, yeah, they just show. They don't show the actual distribution.
Well, for a start, we don't have any data from Bologna. I've been identifying all this Flemish data, specimens.
So I think we still need a lot of collection work on. Well, we need to still collect lots and lots of micrandrena.
Yeah.
And maybe help us. Well, with your knowledge about ecology will guide us to hopefully not just 90% Minutial, but also more
Yeah.
of a
Well, I certainly think over the next year, maybe 2 years, keep collecting. What I would say is, when I see, for example, your presentations on nomada identification, it's always very interesting because you, as a group, have developed these additional field characters that I would never use as a microscope taxonomist. So I think over the next year or 2 years, a combination of specimens and field characters, by the end of that process, you will have an equivalent to your nomada field character understanding. But yeah, certainly for now, keep collecting.
So you will buy boxes. Those are the most expensive things.
Yeah, they are. I just I bought for myself for a Christmas present and 16 more boxes.
16.
16.
16.
Yeah, not quite 60. 16. I brought them back from England.
The double ones.
The double ones, yeah. And I spent several days reorganizing my collection, and I have enough space for another half season of collecting.
That's good.
Maybe 1 season of collecting.
So after the break, we'll do a little collection for you.
Okay.
So you can pay to get more.
Oh, wonderful.
I didn't see it.
Any more general questions before we move on to the microscope part?
You haven't spoken about Albophaciata yet.
Ah, yes. That's because it's now quite well. I can show you a confidential. Yeah,